Is our recording. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the American Master Socratic Seminar, and we all seem to be situated. Braden, it's okay if you have your microphone on, unless you're in a noisy spot and you would prefer not to, because it's too noisy where you are. Typing the questions is just fine. And so we don't, it was only if it's noisy in the background where you're at that we would ask that you mute, but I think everybody's okay. We're good to go. So we've done this before, but just to make sure people are remembering the rules, can't raise hands because I can't see them. And you were having a discussion to kind of get the thoughts out that you want to explore for the purpose of writing later. So this is a way for you to have a conversation to get the information that you need. So just talk, just get out these ideas and share them and respond to them. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read the documents that were assigned in this. So when you go back to refer to evidence, make sure that you tell us what page. I hope everybody has your textbook in front of you. Ladies, do you have textbooks in front of you? Somebody may want to go and grab one of those textbooks, unless you have the documents themselves in front of you. If you are without your textbook, you can always look these up. These are published in the public record, so you can Google them and they'll be there, but they just won't have the questions or the pretty pictures that your textbook has. It's okay to disagree, although this particular one is talking about rhetoric, and so know this, rhetoric is very subjective. It can be ethos and pathos and logos, maybe even all three at the same time. So all we're asking you to do is justify your answer. And that's what's going to help you in the long run when you start writing the essay about analyzing the rhetoric that these three men used, trying to convince the colonists that they needed to go to war in order to fight for their independence. So this is actually what your essay topic is going to be. So if we can kind of keep ourselves focused in our discussions about what you need here, it will be very helpful. In order to start a revolution, people must be persuaded to give up the routine of their lives, no matter how bad. Patrick Henry, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson were each were instrumental in their own way to help persuade the colonists to engage in an almost impossible war to win. Write an informative essay that describes what each man did and how he did it to turn the hearts of the revolution towards to turn the hearts of the colonists toward the American Revolution. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. So we're going to look at some of the responses to the discussion boards, and we'll also look at some other questions regarding these men. So regarding Patrick Henry, and actually, you know what, Mr. Short, I had meant to ask you if you wanted me to include any of your students' discussion board responses. So would you like to, oh, he'll be back in a few minutes. He's working with a student. Okay, well, then he's probably not hearing me right now. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Erickson, English. Okay. So here's what somebody wrote on the discussion board, and this kind of throws the three of them together. I discovered that Patrick Henry used more logos in comparison to pathos. Furthermore, I found that Thomas Paine used pathos too. To illustrate, Thomas Paine states, I once felt all that kind of anger which a man ought to feel against the mean principles that are held by the Tories. The quote makes the audience feel anger towards the Tories too, in my opinion. So let's take first with the Patrick Henry. Would you guys agree that Patrick Henry used more logos than he would pathos? And we're in the speech to the Virginia Convention on page 122. Okay. Can you give us an example or two? Can you show us one of them? Where are you looking for this? Mm-hmm. Very good. And what I like what you said there is that the metaphors, the figurative language, and Mr. Short had pointed this out earlier. Whenever you're using figurative language, you are using it with pathos in mind, because those poetic devices are often used to express emotion. Very good. Does anybody else want to chime in about Patrick Henry and the devices he uses? I hope you're typing right, Braden. In the meantime, why don't I look at one other quote from somebody else? Ethos. Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? He is telling the colonists that if they don't go through with this revolution, they will remain slaves to the British. Patrick Henry was a big influencer for colonists to fight for their freedom. My question is, looking at this piece of evidence, is this demonstrating ethos? Okay. What does the quote show? How would you characterize the quote? Ethos, pathos, logos. Because right. This is, as you said, more metaphorical. You know, we're purchased at the price of chains and slavery. We're not talking about literal slavery here, although they may think it will become that. And Braden, yes, I agree. It does sound more like pathos to me, because it is this poetic language that's actually leading to the argument itself. So it would be more pathos. Could we find maybe some ethos that Patrick Henry uses? What would be a better quote to demonstrate his use of ethos? And Braden, you don't have to copy out a whole sentence. If you just want to, if you can tell us what page number and maybe start with the first three words, we would be able to find it. But we want to hear from you too. What would be one example of ethos Patrick Henry uses, or do you think he does use ethos at all? They are sent over to bind and rivet us. Those chains with the British ministry have been so long forging. So, Braden, if this is ethos, let me ask you this: who is the credibility, or who is the expert in this that Payne is referring to? He is referring to the British pushing slavery on us. Okay. Remember, the ethos is, I know this because I've experienced it, or I know this because I have asked an expert. would Patrick Henry know a lot about slavery from what you know about him?
Yeah, now I'm vegetarian.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Braden, what I was looking at, they sent us over to bind and rivet us those chains. Are they literally chained? They are not. So he's figuratively speaking. As long as he's figuratively speaking, then what argument device is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Take a guess. Ethos, pathos, logos, Braden. Pathos. Very good. So I'm wondering, are we having a hard time even finding ethos in Patrick Henry's speech? Hi, Mr. Short. Okay. We're looking for ethos. Does Patrick Henry use ethos at all? We know he uses lots of pathos. We know that he uses some logos, but we're looking for ethos right now. Okay. Right. I don't even think I know. I mean, his opening line, Mr. President, no man thinks more highly than I do of patriotism as well as abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. I mean, that's somewhat ethos, kind of setting that up for the convention. You know me as someone who's patriotic, and you know someone who, you know, who wants the best for our community. But I think that's the only place he actually uses it. See what else somebody put. And this actually puts all three of them together as well. The speech to the Virginia Convention was truly inspirational. By using logical rhetorics, Patrick Henry was able to persuade the people that the war was inevitable and they needed to take a stand. For instance, Jefferson exclaimed, "The war is inevitable and let it come." Moreover, Patrick Henry urged the crowd to prepare for the revolution due to the fact that the war was coming so quickly. Patrick Henry shouted, "The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms." Logical retorts such as these fueled the speech and convinced the crowd that the war was dawning upon them. Without the use of logical rhetorics, the speech would not have been powerful enough to move the crowd. Do any of you have a response to this comment? And then Braden said, "Just so you know, the feed keeps cutting out, so I'm missing chunks of your words." Checks. Okay. Hopefully, Braden, what will happen is that now, Cassie, Rebecca, are you hearing me okay? Okay. So I think what will be helpful, Braden, is later on when I get this uploaded, that you'll be able to hear everything. So I apologize that you're not getting this fully right now. I'm sorry, what was my last question? Oh, what do you guys think of this? Mm-hmm. Okay. Are they logical, though? Mm-hmm. Like, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Good. Want to make sure that everybody's clear on the ethos, pathos, logos, because I know that it can get confusing at times. Um, because it's based off of Greek roots, some people have a tendency to kind of apply them when they aren't really applicable. Uh, for example, ethos. Um, People might say that it's related to ethics, and it's not. That ethos is, for one thing, and Mr. Shirt, would you happen to know, is ethical actually a Latin root? I assume Mr. Short was back with us. Hi. Okay, because that's what the problem is. There a lot of students will think ethos ethical, and that doesn't work. I think of the E. It starts with E, so I think of evidence or expertise. What is the credibility of the author? So ethos is um, either I have been through an experience and I know what I'm talking about, or it's I'm going to somebody who has been through it and has got the information. Go ahead. Okay. As long as you keep it that way, because a lot of times we know ethics is what? What do you say ethics is? And I see Braden has commented on that. Moral is most, meaning custom. So it that good. Thank you, Braden. That clears it up. If the ethos is character, we're not talking about the morality, we're talking about the believability of someone. So that's ethos. That's why, it's so critical when we look at grammar in your essay. If you make a lot of mistakes in grammar and punctuation in your essay, it takes away your ethos, because the assumption is if you don't know what you're doing in writing it, you must not also know about what you're writing about. So it's important for you to, keep up a professional, academic persona, and that's ethos. Um, Logos, that's the easy one, because what is logos? Logic. So it's all fact based. And it's what everybody knows. If you know that this is a common occurrence, you can go with that as logic. Uh, and then that leaves pathos. And I remember a college professor of mine once said the definition of pathos is dropping a brick on a kitten. So that's a very visual representation, but it is totally emotion. It's appealing to emotion. Okay, let's see what we have on this one. Thomas Paine also uses all three appeals in his speech. Ethos, but my secret opinion has ever been and still is that God Almighty will not give up a people to military destruction or leave them unsupportedly to perish, who have so earnestly and so repeatedly sought to avoid the calamities of war. This is an ethos appeal because he says that God will help America through troubling times. Then for logos, but it will not do to sacrifice a world either to their folly or their baseness. The period is now arrived in which they, the Tories, or we must change our sentiments, or one or both must fall. This is a logos appeal because he is trying to persuade the reader that fighting back is the best course of action. And then pathos, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. This is pathos appeal because he uses emotions to try to make the reader believe that the British are evil. Would you guys agree that this person has fully understood and demonstrated all three of the rhetorical strategies?
My thinking every day, not the type to Aaron saying nice bike because of the girl. Is it too like their Lori?
Okay.
Something like about Lori.
Mr. Short, do you want to jump in about why this quote actually can this quote actually represent ethos? Who have so earnestly and so repeatedly sought to avoid the calamities of war. Mm-hmm. And I think you had said in the morning session too that when you consider the audience of Thomas Paine, that the majority of the people who listened to what or read what he said or listened to him actually did all believe that God was the Almighty and had control over their lives. Is that what I heard you say earlier today? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so Braden's comments, but to people that don't believe in God, wouldn't that be pathos? You're right. And see, that's what's, I think that's why I love rhetoric so much, because the question is it completely from the speaker that you use these argumentations, or is it a combination of speaker and audience, having to understand your audience and what your audience believes? So that's why I love studying it, because really, if these words cannot stand on their own unless there's an audience to which they are addressed. And so sometimes it helps to understand the audience too. I think Braden has it right when he says, even if I mean, there may have been people at that time listening who did not believe in God. It's very possible that there were atheists at that time listening to this. So if he gave that argument, let's say that what if there were people in that audience who did not believe in God? Does that argument, does that statement help at all in persuading them? What would their reaction be? Yeah. Okay. So, but Thomas Paine knew who his audience was, and I would argue that if Thomas Paine came today to make that same argument, I'm not sure if he would use all these references. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I know part of it would be what his own religious faith was, but he knew his audience. So in answer to your question, Cassidy, I would say, I don't know. Because it really does depend on, that's another one of the devices is called Kairos, Kairos. And that is presenting an argument in its time. And so when you think about what was happening at the time during, as they were drafting this, what events set this in motion, that's part of the argument as well, because Thomas Paine is basically saying God is calling us to action here. So it's like he's the authority that's calling us to action. And if the majority of people during that time believed in God, then it would be an ethos appeal, maybe as well as Kairos. Good discussion. We're getting deep here. Okay. We'll do this last one. I have Thomas Jefferson up here, and then as I was reading it, I realized that this was another one who blended all three. So I apologize that they weren't specifically one or the other. But Patrick Henry uses the rhetoric pathos frequently in his speech to the Virginia Convention. He uses words that connect with the colonists' emotions, which would help convince them to unite against Britain. His quote, "Give me liberty or give me death," shows how much he cared about his own and fellow colonists' fundamental rights. Thomas Paine uses logos to convince the colonists to separate from Britain. An example of this would be his pamphlet called Common Sense. This was direct and straight to the point about how it was a necessity that we needed to grow patriotism and separate from Britain. He explained to the colonists how it was common sense as to why we needed our independence. And Thomas Jefferson used logos and pathos while writing the Declaration of Independence. This gave colonists pride in their country and made other countries realize how important it was that we finally separated from Britain. Does this person have good examples of each of the three ethos, pathos, logos? Okay. And would it be common sense to think that common sense is logical? I guess they think so, maybe. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. Which, if the assumptions are based on things that happen all the time, that's also considered logos. So logos is also considered, it's like, can we scientifically prove that the sun will come up in the morning? Maybe, but we know for a fact that it will because it happens all the time. So if things are, they're constants, it's what everybody knows, that's also used as logos. Thomas Jefferson, logos and pathos. Did you guys find that with the Declaration of Independence, that it was a mix of logos and pathos? Give me an example of logos. Perfect. So he makes the list. Here's what you have done, A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way through. And then where does he bring in the pathos? Or does he? Very good. Okay. What page is that on? Or never mind. But for me, what page is it on? Or anybody listening to this, what page did you find that on? 141. Okay. All right, good. At this point, do any of you want to kind of jump in with your own response about any three of them? Was there one that you felt was better than the others, or did you feel that would you think that all three of them were necessary in the revolution and persuading people to go to war? Do you think that that the United States needed all three of them, or is there an argument that would work better than others? Okay. Mm-hmm. Very good. That's one thing they wouldn't want, especially if they had pride. Anybody else? Rebecca? Let's see. Braden says, I like the quote, give me liberty or give me death. It just shows how much he cares about his country. Yes. But my question would be, do you think he meant it? Would he really die? Would he put himself in harm's way in order to make sure that he lived a free life? Okay. Martyr. Okay. Now, in your U.S. history, I don't know where you were at this point. What do we know about the signers of the Declaration of Independence? Have you gotten that far yet? Okay. What did he? Yeah. Okay. Nice answer, Braden. Yeah. Braden's fine. Each one of them, everyone who signed that Declaration of Independence, might as well have been signing his death warrant, because to be, this would be, I've just lost a word. What is it when you traitor? They were committing treason by doing this, and treason was punishable not just by death but by painful death. There were different. Thank you. Treason. They were really. I think there was what they could have been hung. They could have been drawn and quartered, disemboweled. I mean, I don't know at that point what the punishment was, but it wasn't fun. Let's just put it that way. So when he says that, give me liberty or give me death, he really does mean it. He is saying, I would rather die than to live under this oppression. So, yeah. Okay. We've got some questions here. I'm going to kind of go quickly through these. What this is kind of practice for when you're thinking about how you're going to describe the different appeals that these men use, how you go about setting up what you're talking about. So, for example, Patrick Henry in his speech states, "This is no time for ceremony." How are you going to identify this? Is this ethos, pathos, or logos?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking. We know that the speech is on starts on 122. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, good. Didn't take that hard. Okay. So ethos, pathos, or logos? And keep in mind what you already said about Henry, Patrick Henry. What was his primary tools that he was using there? It's a combination of pathos and logos, right? And who was it who said it earlier about what his basic argument is? What is his basic argument? Right. And so that's part of what he's appealing to. His audience are the other, I guess we would say, representatives of those who represented the colonies at that point. And so, why does that work to that audience? Why would that work? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely. And you didn't want, I mean, people don't want to be called a chicken now, but back then, especially, you were being weak. And with Patrick Henry, he was, he's kind of like the George Patton of his day, I would think. But yeah. All right. Henry states, we are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. First of all, what is this an allusion to? And what's, go ahead, specific, which part, which chapter? Mm-hmm. Um, think I think just yeah, they turn into beasts. The ones that survive and can actually get to shore, yes. So why is that so significant here? Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay. Now find one logical appeal and one emotional appeal on page 125 in your textbook. So that means we are going into, I think we're still in Patrick Henry. Yeah, we're in the Virginia speech. 125. Find one logical and one emotional. Thank you, Braden. I see sirens. They are sent over to bind us and rivet us. Those chains and the British ministry have been so long forging, and that was left probably in your copy too on your. Very good, Braden. And which of the two is that again? Remind us which one that is again. Pathos. Very good. Okay, Braden's found the emotional. Now find the logical. Okay. Okay. that part in the dashes, remember that if it's in the dashes, those dashes act like arrows. So let's just see what's in the dashes. If we need to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have so long been contending. So it's, look, this is what we have been asking for. And we ask nicely, and now we're still not getting them. They're still treating us like this. So we must go to war. Yes. And then Braden added another one. Has Great Britain any enemy in this quarter of the world to call for this accumulation of navies and armies? That is definitely a good one, yes. The fact that, why are these guys out here? Why do they need cannons if we're on the same side? Very good. All right. In paragraph 2 of Thomas Paine's Crisis Number 1 on page 132, what reasons does Paine give to persuade the colonists that not all is lost even after their recent defeats? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. And by the way, the background information kind of helps us too. In 1776, the Continental Army was exhausted, demoralized, and outnumbered by the enemy. So they had lost. They had lost a campaign, and so what was the reason that Paine said they had lost that campaign? Or possible reason, actually. Mm, nope, it's a little earlier. Whether the independence of the continent was declared too soon or delayed too long, I will not now enter into as an argument. My own simple opinion is that had it been 8 months earlier, it would have been much better. What's he saying there? What happened that made them lose that campaign? It's okay. It's the second paragraph of the whole thing, so it's the first full paragraph on page 133. Right. Well, they had, what they had done is that they had waited to go to war. When they finally went to war, by that point it was winter, and it's harder to win a war when you're cold and hungry and you trying to trudge through the snow. The British, on the other hand, they came by ship. They could replace themselves out, so they could be more refreshed. So he's making the argument that if they had actually went to war earlier, like when he suggested before, that it's almost like an "I told you so" moment at this point. So, what does he know about his audience that they will react to this? Because right, and they said, look, this is where we messed up. But if we go back to war now, we're not going to have to worry about the winter, because now they're going back in the warmer months where they're actually going to have a chance to defeat the British Army. Plus, he reminds them, so the quote that you brought up earlier about tyranny, that reminds them of what they're fighting against. It was really hard for them when they were fighting during the winter. It was the worst time to actually go to war. Okay. In paragraph 1, and we are still in the crisis, what evidence is provided as an appeal to logos? And actually, oh no, that wouldn't quite be the one that Mr. Short had earlier. We're looking for logos, though, in this first paragraph. Let me just go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. That sounds good. Because what makes that logos? They do, and they're being treated as the same as those slaves, right? Not given full personhood. Okay. Did anybody else see any other logos in there? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because what he's doing there is he's including the colonists. So when you're using the pronoun we, he's putting everything together. You and me, this is what we're in together. We have from Braden, Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right only to tax. Yes, so you're what this is. The British are saying this. We know this is not true. That's definitely a logos appeal. Good. Okay, look at the picture on page 134. The Künstler, the world turned upside down. Did you know that you can actually put rhetoric in a painting? So what messages are being communicated in this picture? What do you notice? What's one of the first things that you noticed about this painting? Mm-hmm. He's on the horse, and the general is doing what? Mm-hmm. And he's looking down. Beyond just the literal translation of it, what could be a figurative translation of that? Mm-hmm. Because he is what? He has higher power. He is higher. He's on the horse. That gives him authority over the redcoats. What else do you notice here? What's unusual about that canon? Yeah, yeah. The real noticeable thing about it, at least to me, is it's the biggest thing in the portrait. It's the largest item because it's in the foreground. But even so, you've got its size indicates what? What is the figurative translation of that? Mine's bigger than yours. What does that mean? It is indicating on a subconscious level that they have more power, that they are superiority. Good, yeah. Let's see if we can pick one other thing in that. Oh, by the way, what would that be? What appeal would that be? I'd definitely be scared to death if that thing were sitting right in front of me. So I'm thinking more pathos than ethos. Although ethos could be, yes. What? Yes. Not to mention the rest of you, if they were to fire it at you. Anything else you notice? Let's do one more. Okay. Certainly a lot more blue coats in that than there are red coats. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, how much of that was accurate, though? Not very. In fact, probably if it were the other way around, if it had been switched around, it would probably be more accurate. But the point of the portrait is to show the superiority of the colonists and that it was possible to defeat the British Army, which in itself can help with the persuasiveness of the argument. Okay, I am going to. I think we talked about that one with the point of the Declaration of Independence. And Mr. Short talked about the effect of parallelism. First of all, just to kind of make sure we understand what parallelism is, can somebody explain what that is again? Parallelism? But when? Right. Yes. Now, that's the definition. Can you think of an example? Listen to this. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations begin at a distinguished period, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. So you've got a couple of parallel statements here where you're using the same clause structure in order to really bring in that emphasis. Can somebody find another example of that parallelism? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. Yes, it does. And yes, Braden got it right with the parallelism. Thank you, Braden. Sorry those answers don't pop up quickly enough for you. Okay, so with parallelism, it's another device that is used in what's that going to be? Ethos, pathos, or logos? Mm-hmm. Might be in some instances logos as well, maybe. I think it all depends on what the content of it is. I don't know, but certainly the repetitiveness of it. Okay. Why do you think that protecting the Declaration of Independence has always been so vital to Americans? What do you think? Mm-hmm. It's a symbol of power. Oh, yeah, start of power. Actually, Braden, those answers answer not only my last question, but this question too. Because I don't know if you guys remember The Pursuit of Unhappiness from last year. You guys remember that article? And remember how it said that the idea of pursuing happiness was a relatively new idea? Really, the first time that we know of it is in this Declaration of Independence. And so this document is the first time that we declare as a people that we have this ability, that we must be free, that we have the power to design a government where people can work together in order to establish a government and people can live being happy. So it's a rhetorical document, and the rhetoric in it is just so powerful. And that's why I like that scene. The clip that you saw from the series John Adams, which I would definitely recommend if you have it on Netflix. I learned a lot from that. But when the three of them, John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, are helping with Thomas Jefferson to do the editing of this document, you could see like the three forms of argument working together. Ben Franklin seemed to represent the logical form of it, and John Adams probably the ethos, and Thomas Jefferson the more passionate one. Even though he used a lot of logos, was still very passionate about what he wanted to do there. Okay, so now the reason this is called the SBAC practice module, you're going to be doing a writing with a draft, the whole thing, and then we're going to go immediately into a practice for what is going to happen in the spring. So I'm actually using a different rubric this time. So this time the rubric will be from the SBAC or the CASP testing. And so what you're looking for at this point for this is an informative essay. And it kind of lays out the pattern for you. Patrick Henry, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson were each instrumental in their own way to help persuade the colonists to engage in an almost impossible war to win. Write an informative essay that describes what each man did and how he did it to turn the hearts of the colonists toward the American Revolution. So this will be one of your definite 5 paragraphs, because you need to devote a paragraph to each of the three: Patrick Henry, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson. How did they appeal to their audience of that time period? And be sure that you give examples to that. Do you have any questions for me about anything about this or anything else that we talked about today? No. Well, he used logos. The thing about Jefferson, that's the interesting thing when you look at this piece, because it's the autobiography of the Declaration of Independence. The underlying portions are the parts that were changed. And the inference being during that John Adams series was that Ben Franklin kind of brought him to that logical point because he was so passionate about it. And in fact, I believe the line he says is, this one line that they're looking at that dealt with slavery. And he says, but that's what I feel. And Ben Franklin says, yes, but this is more practical. So that's where he's showing that he's the more logical thinker, although all of them used a balance of ethos, pathos, logos, and a lot of it has to do with who their audience was, and under what circumstances they were saying it. that's actually another element to argument, and that's kairos, Kairos, which is saying something in a particular time period where you're using the pathos of the time period as part of your persuasiveness. I think it has a lot to do why Jimmy Kimmel right now is a lot more popular than Jimmy Fallon, because of what happened with his son back in the summertime, and the whole idea with whether Obamacare should be repealed. I think that's the reason why he's very popular right now, because the kairos worked for him. So, but he's not part of your essay, so I digress. I apologize. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Mr. Short, are you still with us? I don't think so. He said he'd be back in a minute, so I guess he's not with us. Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude this. Thank you so much. This is a great conversation. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay? Thank you all. Bye-bye.